I've got great news. In just 18 short days, professional football returns to your TV screens. That's right, folks. The United Football League 2026 edition starts up in just a couple of weeks. And that means we got to continue on with our UFL Team Preview series. And today's episode, it's all about those Houston Gamblers. Welcome, football fans, to another edition of the D-Gen Docs. Yes, that is right, folks. A UFL edition, a special Texas number 2, the Texas two-step Houston Gamblers. We're all in from one gambler to another. What is up, folks? I'm your host of the D-Gen Doc, and we are continuing on with this UFL 2026 Team Previews edition. We've got 3 down. We've got 5 to go. We are reaching the halfway mark here. Look, folks, the way this is going to go, in case this is your first episode checking out, cheers to you. Welcome. Cheers to you. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. A little bit of show structure from the top here. What we're going to talk about, obviously, UFL 2026. Look, we did a whole new league this year, right? There's different teams. There's new ownership. There's new rules. There's a lot that you got to know. Already put out an episode about everything you need to know. Then a rules breakdown for 2026. And we have now started our 2026 team preview series. We did the DC Defenders. We did the Dallas Renegades. We did the St. Louis Battlehawks. And now it is time for Houston. We maybe have a problem, maybe not. Let's see how these Houston Gamblers stack up. We're going to be going through everything from coaching structure to roster breakdown. What do they look like last year? What do they look like this year? What's their overall outlook for the 2026 UFL season? We've got a whole bunch of change around the league, so it's my job to get us ready for this new season, which less than 3 weeks away. It is going to be here before we know it, so it's a time to get prepped so we know who's on our screen and ultimately who we're betting on this season. Very fitting episode for these Houston Gamblers here. The former Houston Roughnecks, that was the old, but we are now, well, back to the old, a little bit of the old here with the Houston Gamblers. So they were, back in the day, back in the 1980s, when the USFL was the OG name was the Houston Gamblers back in 1984. They were the Houston Gamblers. So any of our older folks there, wiser boys and gals in the audience, they may remember the USFL. Definitely wasn't alive back then, but seeing pictures looks great. And they were the back in the USFL, back in the second edition, they were the Gamblers, and then when they went to the UFL, they became the Houston Roughnecks for the past couple of years, and now they're back to the Houston Gamblers. So always nice when a team goes back to their roots there and kind of don't really know why they strayed away. I think Houston Gamblers is a really cool name. Roughnecks, yeah, I don't know. It just never really worked. Also, it probably doesn't help that they were absolutely terrible during their Roughnecks franchise. So at least in their new start, UFL spring football, Houston's had a little bit of a rough go. But time for a new change. Let's get that fresh Gamblers back in. Let's get the crowd back in, get back the excitement. And speaking of crowds, this was a problem for Houston over the years, especially recent history when they played at TDECU Stadium there in Houston. They are now kind of going with a lot of these teams. They're moving over to Shell Energy Stadium. They'll be sharing it with Houston Dynamo FC, the soccer team there. And that's kind of been the way that new owner Mike Rapoli has kind of gone. Let's face it, right now, spring football is not in the phase where they're going to be able to bring in 40 to 60,000. Like, they don't have the fan base, the continuity, the track record of collegiate and professional football with the NCAA, Division I and the NFL, right? It's just not there. So to rent out these massive stadiums that cost more for overhead and just honestly just look bad. It's bad for the optics when you're watching a game and there's no one there. You're at a game and there's no one there, right? So I think, new owner Mike Rapoli, he's really trying to improve the fan experience, to bump up the fan numbers, not only tickets sold, but just the overall ambiance. And that means more intimate, smaller stadium. 20 to 30,000 capacity stadiums is more than enough to create a good home environment and to actually get that kind of packed crowd feeling. And that's kind of the entire goal here. We're seeing a lot of these teams move to kind of out of these giant stadiums and into more of these soccer stadiums. And I really kind of like that. When you, especially with spring football, we've seen things like the Beer Snake. We've seen things now, the Battle Dome in St. Louis, they can pack that place, 35, 40,000. But even in their stadium, they're still leaving a decent amount of seats open just because how large it is, but they can create some home environments. And this is where we're trying to get that. Houston has really lacked that. And, they're not the only one, but they have struggled with the past couple of years. So hopefully this move to Shell Energy Stadium is going to be helpful for them. Now, let's look back a little bit let's look back to move forward here. Let's talk about the 2025 season when they were the Houston Roughnecks under this man, Curtis Johnson, CJ Johnson there. As the Houston Roughnecks. Last year, they were 5-5, missed the playoffs as the Roughnecks, and then head coach was Curtis Johnson here. Honestly, one of their better seasons in recent memory. They've not made the playoffs and been kind of a bottom feeder the past 3-ish years. Ever since the new resurgence here of the USFL/UFL. So, looking at how this team went, it was really kind of a mix of the quarterbacks, and they couldn't really decide on one. When they finally got Jalen McClendon in there as the starter, team started to improve down the stretch, and they were competitive in some games. Let's look at the stats here, uncover the numbers. So from a straight yardage standpoint and scoring standpoint, this was a bottom of the league team. On offense, they were number 6 in yardage in total offense, and they were number 6 scoring offense, only averaging 18.3 points per game. Third lowest in the league. They were 7th in rushing and 5th in pass offense. Again, only 8 teams in the league. So bottom halves of all of those categories. And then on defense, they were 7th in yardage allowed, 5th in scoring, allowing 20.1 points, 6th in rush defense, and 6th in pass defense. 6th in pass defense. So honestly, given how bad the stats and numbers are, they kind of improved above expectation. Like their performance on the field as far as wins and losses, 5-5, 500 record. With these stats, honestly, they kind of overperformed, which is interesting to say about a team that doesn't make the playoffs, but a real key part of why they had some success in the 2025 season. They played a lot of close games, and they also were +8 in the turnover margin. They were really good at limiting their turnovers. They only had 9 giveaways, and they had 17 takeaways. Now, in terms of regression and being able to reproduce that, you got basically a whole new roster. So things kind of go out the window when you're trying to talk about regression and team over years, because there's so much lack of continuity. But +8 in the turnover margin was impressive, which allowed them to kind of outperform their stats as well. They really lacked talent on the offensive line, talent at the wide receiver position. Running back room was beat up. Defense wasn't super great. So 5-5, honestly, a decent coaching job and fairly impressive there for the Houston Roughnecks. Now, moving forward into the Houston Gamblers era here, let's talk. This is a betting show. So, of course, we're going to talk the 2026 championship odds here for your gamblers. 3 different books for you. DraftKings and Bet365 both have them as 14-1. And ScoreBet, formerly ESPN Bet, has them as 13-1. So they're the second longest odds, and some books the longest odds to win the championship there. And this kind of makes sense. Houston, again, has been kind of a bottom feeder team. Now, talking about odds, and we'll get more into the weeds a little bit of this later in future episodes, but there's only 8 teams in the league. In past seasons, it used to be 2 conferences, the XFL and the USFL, 4 teams in each. Top 2 teams of the conferences go to the playoffs and they play each other. The teams in the conference play each other, and then the from conferences they meet in the championship game. This year, it is purely just the top 4 teams. So no conferences, 8 teams, top 4 make it to the playoffs. Then you seed, the 1 seed plays the 4, 2 and the 3 play, and then they play in the championship, right? So that is of note, because in years past, if one conference was stacked, you still knew the other side had to get 2 teams in. So even if you got really 4 good teams on one side, doesn't really make sense to load up all on that side if you got some value over here at some of those longer odds. So got to kind of think of it a little bit differently this year with the changing of the playoff format. But I will get into kind of after the season previews. I'm going to do one episode before the season, just kind of a final wrap up of the season overview, talk about which futures I'm playing and which I would advise you to play, because I do think there is still value, and especially with new teams, new venues, new coaches, new roster turnover, it's hard to project what this league is going to look like. We've already seen a decent amount of changes in the betting markets because there is a lot of variability. There's no preseason. So, based off these rosters, we got to do a lot of projection, which is exactly what we're going to do here. Let's get into the coaching structure. And the head coach is a guy who has some familiarity here. Mr. Kevin Sumlin was announced the head coach of the Houston Gamblers. Now, Kevin Sumlin is a guy who served as the Houston Gamblers both head coach and general manager in 2022. So he has some familiarity back in the USFL. Sumlin was a linebacker himself for Purdue. He was a solid linebacker, played 4 years and then wasn't professional NFL good. So he went right to coaching immediately after. He's been a coach for a very, very long time. He was a longtime collegiate head coach. Houston, he had some great success leading them to a 12-0 season. Then Texas A&M, that's really where he kind of got his name. That was, of course, was the Johnny Manziel days. His freshman season, 11-2, Heisman winner there. That was one of the highlights. And then he went to Arizona for a little bit. He's got 90-plus collegiate career wins. So a fairly successful college coach. His offense is typically, more that explosive, pass-oriented kind of talk. It might be a little bit just personnel dependent and more of the college game. But for his spring professional football career, 3-7 as the head coach and GM. So again, since this rebirth of spring football, Houston not been a great franchise, hasn't had a winning season yet. Past couple years since that 2022 stint, he's been working for the University of Maryland football on their coaching staff. Not a super prominent position, just still staying around the game there. So, he's been in coaching for a long, long, long time. So you kind of know what you're going to get here with Kevin Sumlin. He brings a certain level of professionalism and, some of that experience that some of these coaches he's going to be going against are first-time coaches at any level. So he is, you would imagine, at least has a leg up there. However, least recently hasn't been the most successful at the stops. Now, going over to the offensive coordinator and defense coordinator position. Offensive coordinator is Coach Eric Price. He was the pass game coordinator for Houston back in 2023. He's a former college football OC at schools like Alabama, UTEP, Memphis, and Tulane. He also had a couple NFL stints as an offensive coordinator. So he is a very experienced play caller. He's done this at the NFL level, at the FBS, NCAA level, at school like Bama, obviously high expectations there. And then he does have some spring football experience being the pass game coordinator for Houston back in 2023. So check on the experience for Eric Price. Defensive coordinator as well. Very relevant experience. Marvin Sanders, he was the DC for the formerly Dallas, then Arlington Renegades. Now they're back to Dallas Renegades. Those Renegades were XFL champions in the 2023 season. And just last season, even with a fairly limited talented, or their talent on that roster was not something like we've seen of the Birmingham Stallions, where it's just they have dudes all over the place. Last year's team with the Renegades, they were the number one defense in according to yardage. I believe they were number 3 in scoring in 2025. So he did a really, really solid job with that unit. He's also been a former college football staffer for many, many years, but he has past 3 years, he's been in the XFL, been in the UFL, been in spring football. So he's very familiar with this format. So, you got a lot of experience. Obviously, that's kind of the name of the game for this coaching staff with Sumlin, Price, and Sanders. They're all multiple years of experience, all experience in spring football. I think they're probably, other than the DC Defenders, one of the only coaching staffs that can say that. So this is a very experienced staff. We're just going to have to see how that turns out for him. All right, turning over to the player side, let's start with the quarterback room because that is always the fun room there. let's the now we went from the coaches where you had a ton of spring football experience. Now we go to the quarterback room, where two out of the three guys have zero spring league experience, but they do have one guy there. So quarterback room is Hunter Deckers, Donovan Smith, and Nolan Henderson there. We'll start with Nolan Henderson, who's likely going to be the QB3 coming in. He's been the backup for Houston for the past 2 years. He's, last year, 4 games played, 55% completion or 56% completion percentage, only 183 yards and 2 touchdowns in 36 pass attempts. So very limited playing time. He was behind, McClendon and Anthony Brown for the Roughnecks last year. He showed some flashes, but he's just never really been able to get much of a true shot in the past couple of years. Houston's had some not great quarterback play. So that's probably not a ringing endorsement if he could not get any playing time on those teams. Now he's going to in a battle against two guys who had pretty decent college careers. So we'll start with Donovan Smith, the former Texas Tech and Houston quarterback. High level prospect. He played 2 years at Tech, and then his last 2 years of college football at Houston. Now, he kind of played sparingly throughout the 3 of the 4 years, but in 2023 was his 1 year as a true starter for Houston. Not a great year for the team overall, but decent year with, I believe that was first year of Willie Fritz. May not have been, actually. I think he came in 2024. But 1 year as a starter, 64.5% completion percentage, 2,800 pass yards, 22 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. He, pretty damn solid year. Going into his senior year, though, he did lose his starting job halfway through the year in 2024. Just kind of wasn't able to produce at the level that they were wanting there. I believe that was for Willie Fritz's first year in 2024. Just wasn't able to live up to the expectations, and ultimately did lose the job. And that's the last time that he did play, at kind of a professional or organized level, at least from the from what I can find online for his stats wise. So he was a 4-year college guy, didn't start all 4 years, really just started 1 year and kind of played sparingly throughout. Showed some flashes. He's a guy who can be fairly more mobile. He's not the most fleet of foot, but he can bring that aspect to the field. Where we'll see where he's at, and he's going to be competing with another guy who showed some flashes, although wasn't able to really put it all together. Out. This is an interesting one. Let's talk about what a lot of people project as quarterback number one, Hunter Deckers, here joining the Houston Gamblers. Now, in 2022, he was the Iowa State quarterback as a redshirt sophomore. He started all the games for them. Not a great year as the team. I think they were only 4-8, but he was 66% completion percentage, 3,000 plus yards, 19 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. So he was a young player. He was a bit of a gunslinger there, but there was a decent amount of promise for him to be the guy going into that next season. Now, for those that don't remember, that's when there was an FBI sports betting probe in Iowa, and a bunch of players got suspended, including Hunter Deckers. He bet on, I think he had like 300 something bets, nothing crazy money wise, but just kind of dumb college stuff. But the bad part was he bet on Iowa State games, including an Iowa State football game. Obviously can't do that. So he lost his eligibility with the NCAA. He had to transfer to Iowa Western Community College, where, he was able to win, I think, 2 national championships. He led them to decently successful seasons. Now, obviously, it was not at the caliber level of playing that he should have been. But, I mean, the fact that, a guy, look, this is a betting show. It will be. I know I'm doing team previews and stuff, but this is a sports betting channel. Obviously, I sports bet, I gamble. I have no issue with it. I mean, can't do it when you're an athlete, and you definitely can't do it on games that you have any involvement in, right? But how objectively hilarious is it? He finally gets another shot at professional football, and he's on the Houston Gamblers. So a little bit of irony from the universe there, that the guy who got eligibility taken from him for a sports betting probe is now on the Houston Gamblers. Hey, that's just how it works sometimes. But hoping that Hunter Deckers can get a fair shake here. I do think that he is going to be the QB1, but I bet what I'm thinking is Deckers and Smith are going to split some time there until they kind of settle in on a guy. don't love going into the season with a 2 quarterback system. So maybe Sumlin decides he's going to take one guy and ride with it, let the guy try to get into a rhythm. But right now it's Smith and Deckers battling it out. I do think Deckers is kind of the slight leader in the clubhouse, and I would project him to be the day one starter. But I could see them doing that one, QB2. Spring football, you see that a lot because they're trying to give up guys opportunity. I don't like it because it's hard for a guy to get in a flow. And Houston, particularly, has tried to do this over the years, and it's been awful. But it is likely what we're going to see. Now, moving over to the key players on this roster outside of the quarterback room, for some teams, DC, Dallas, Luis Perez, Jordan Ta'amu, can kind of talk about them as key players because we know those are going to be the guys. Teams like St. Louis, teams like Houston, up in the air who that guy's going to be. So hard to say they're going to be a key player because he may be riding the pine all season. But the wide receivers are really, really solid for this team. I'm going to highlight 3 guys at the wide receiver position on offense. So I usually do 4 or 5 on offense and 4 or 5 on defense. Then I'm going to talk about key losses, and then we're going to wrap up with an outlook, what questions we have for this team, and hey, what do I think this team is going to look like in 2026? But talking about these key players for this Houston Roughneck, or trying to make it through the show without doing that, damn it. Houston Gamblers, who didn't show you their uniform, but pretty damn sick, I will say. They've got the little gambling, they got the casino chip on the shoulder. Very solid color scheme. I think they crushed it with these uniforms, way better than the Roughnecks, in my opinion. But wide receivers, going to highlight him. Got to start with Justin Hall. He's been in Houston the past couple of years. He had 62 receptions, 500 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He was kind of the do-it-all wide receiver for them. He is their wide receiver 1, or at least he was the past couple of years. Now he's got a decent running mate. And when I say decent, one of the better wide receivers we've seen in the UFL. In wide receiver Jontre Kirkland, Jontre Kirkland, coming over from San Antonio. He played last 2 years in San Antonio. Last year kind of had a down year, but San Antonio was an absolute mess. Could not figure out the quarterback position or anyone to get him the ball. But in 2024, when they had a decent quarterback room, he had 66 receptions, almost 700 yards, and 3 touchdowns, taking them all the way up to the championship game where they ultimately lost to Birmingham. So Kirkland and Hall have been 2 of the better, probably I'd say both in the top 10 UFL wide receivers that we've seen in the league. So this becomes a very, very dynamic 1-2 punch. And then you got wide receiver Braylon Sanders, who had 300 plus yards and 3 touchdowns for the defending champion DC Defenders last season. Now, in the running back room, a guy that comes back here is Kirk Merritt. If you've been watching spring football, you probably know the name Kirk Merritt. He's a very explosive back. Explosive in the run game, explosive, especially in the receiving game. He's a very, very big threat in the receiving game. However, he has just dealt with injuries the past 2 seasons. He's only been able to play 10 games total. The 2024 season when he was really having some solid games, he had almost 200 receiving yards in just 3 games play. He broke his forearm and was out for the season. Last year, he was kind of in and out of the lineup with some injuries. So he is a dynamic player. He has a lot of potential. We just haven't been able to see him have that sustained success over the season. And I told you on every team, I'm going to be talking about kickers because you got the 4-point field goal in this. You got bringing back the extra point. You can take the extra point from the 33-yard like the NFL does. Kicking, UFL is very funny with the way they handle special teams. If you're a punter, don't go to the UFL. They hate punting, but they do like kickoffs, and they do so if you're a returner, great league for you. Or if you're an actual place kicker, Jake Bates, Brandon Aubrey, this has been some of their best pipeline to the NFL. So kickers and return specialists, come to the UFL. If you're a punter, stay the hell away. But John Hoyland is the kicker for Houston. He's coming over from Wyoming. He was a 5-year kicker, kicked in all 5 years and had some decent stats. He was 73 out of 92 in his career, almost 80%, and a long of 56. One of the more experienced kickers in the league as far as, some of these guys only had 1 or 2 years of college experience. Now, it doesn't always translate. Brandon Aubrey did not kick. I don't even know if he even kicked at Notre Dame. I think he was a soccer player, and that's obviously working out pretty damn well for him. But Hoyland is a guy who's kicked a lot of – he's done a lot of high-pressure kicks in games, 92 kicks at Wyoming. decent experience there. So I think that is a bit of an edge over some of the other teams with more inexperienced kickers. Moving on to the defense, the linebacker room here is also extremely solid. They've got Anthony Hines, who was the leading tackler for the defending champions DC Defenders, 53 tackles and 3 sacks last year. They also bring back to be his running mate their leading tackler, linebacker Marvin Moody, the Houston Roughnecks. Houston's leading tackler for last year. 65 tackles, 3 pass deflections, and 1 interceptions. So Hines and Moody are probably the best linebacker duo in the UFL right now, at least returning production wise. They were very, very productive in their respective teams. You also got cornerback Keenan Isaac, who was the best DB for them last year, 9 pass deflections and 2 interceptions. Defensive end Malik Fisher, he comes over from DC. He played in DC the past 2 seasons. Over those seasons, 56 tackles, 11 sacks, 12 TFLs, again, over the past 2 seasons, but especially, last year was a little bit of a down year for him, but the year before, 2024, he was a game wrecker. So if they can get some of that production off the edge, because we'll talk about it, but that edge room is looking a little bit thin, and that's something they struggled to get last year was a lot of sacks in production. And then finally, safety Eli Walker coming over from Memphis, 57 tackles, 1 TFL, 2 pass deflections, and 1 interception. Very much a stat stuffer on a bad Memphis team. He was one of the leaders of a defense who was actually out there able to produce. So you've got multiple guys on this team between Hines, Moody, and Walker who just know how to fill the stat sheet and just find the football. They're always around the football. So that is a very, very solid core there, at least through the middle of your defense. Now, getting over to some key losses, what differences are we going to see from last year? Quarterback Damon Armet, who had some NFL experience, he's no longer with the team. Defensive end Shaka Tony, who they tried to draft, is not with the team. So, in the UFL, you can draft guys, but they don't always have to show up, whether they want to play for the NFL or they just don't want to play in the UFL or whatever it may be. Obviously, you try not to draft guys that aren't going to play for you, but it does happen. And as of, a couple weeks ago, the Gamblers had 79% of the guys they drafted actually show up to camp. So kind of in the bottoms of the league. I think DC had the lowest with 73%, but 79%, not great, but they're having to fill and plug in place guys to go ahead and take those positions that they thought they were drafting for. Now, some of those key losses, quarterback one from last year, Jalen McClendon, 7 games played, 65.3% completion percentage, 1464 pass yards, 6 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Now he's not out of the league. We're going to see him coming up in a team a couple days from now when I do their team preview. But he was their QB1. He was the most consistent quarterback they had. He's shown, McClendon is a guy who's been in spring football for the past 3 years. He's shown some flashes of being a very, very capable passer. Does have some turnover issues at times, but I thought he did very well to kind of steady the ship for a very bad Houston team last season. Their top 2 running backs from last year, Zakonje Square, who had 336 rush yards and 4 touchdowns, and running back 2, Lorenzo Lingard, 235 rush yards and 2 touchdowns. So their top 2 backs are not coming back this year. Their offense was not great. Their running backs were okay. So not a major loss, but that is their top 2 backs production-wise, with Merritt, not being able to produce at the level due to the injuries. And then wide receivers 2 and 3, Kiki Chisholm and Emmanuel Butler. Both those guys, Chisholm, 31 receptions, 299 yards, 4 touchdowns. Butler, more that deep threat, 11 receptions, but 182 yards and 2 touchdowns. I did think they replaced their wide receiver room very well, but some losses on offense. And over on the defensive side, one of their leaders in the back end, safety Leon Neal Jr. with 46 tackles, 3 pass deflections, and 1 interception. Don't know how they did not put him on their reserves and kind of retain him for this year. Again, if you miss, the everything about the UFL, you get 12 guys that you get to basically keep on your team if you would like in their reserves. They did not use that on one of them. Now he's on the DC Defenders. I think that's going to be a big loss for them. I know Eli Walker is a good player, but Leon O'Neal is one of the better players in the UFL. They also lost defensive lineman Tayshawn Boyer, who is an absolute stud for them. Tayshawn Boyer, Dowser there. 6 games played, 4 sacks, 7 TFLs. He's now on the Dallas Renegades. He was their leading sack guy in only playing 6 games. and his running mate, defensive lineman Jameer Jones, who had 30 tackles, 3.5 sacks, and 8 TFLs. So your top 2 leaders in sacks and TFLs last year are no longer on the team this year. So they're going to have to figure out. This was already a team that struggled to get that chaos at players, as far as they got the turnovers, but sacks and creating pressure was something they did struggle with. Now their top 2 guys are out for this season. So they got to figure out where they're going to get that production. Is it going to be a guy like Malik Fisher or someone who we're not thinking about that's going to step up for this team? Okay, time for the 2026 outlook. What questions do we have for the Houston Gamblers? What is this going to look like? Some of the biggest questions I have is, can Kirk Merritt handle these RB1 duties? He's shown to be an explosive guy. He's shown to have some of the potential, but durability is very much a question. He's dealt with injuries in 2 out of the 2 years that he's played spring football. Can he handle those RB1 duties? Because, their top 2 backs from last year are not coming back. So there's going to be a lot on Kirk Merritt's plate, and they need to get the running game going if their offense is going to have success. So that's a question on his durability. Also, I talked about it, but where is this pass rush going to come? I know Malik Fisher, comes over. Not a great year last year, but he had a really solid year in 2024. Can he recreate some of that magic? Maybe it comes artificially from defensive coordinator Marvin Sanders, getting creative with the blitz packages that he ran. This is going to be interesting. I think that if they cannot generate a pass rush, no defense is really able to do a lot. These guys can't hold up forever on the back end if you can't get a pass rush. So I have concerns about their ability to generate a pass rush there. And then finally, which quarterback takes the reins for this team? Now, these 3 quarterbacks, they all profile a little bit similar. They can move around a little bit, all 3 of them. They have shown things in the passing game. All 3 of them can get in trouble with some turnovers at times, but none of them are really kind of, I would say, in the top half of the league of quarterbacks. The spring football is all about proving people wrong and second opportunities. But right now, from a projection case, Hunter Deckers, Donovan Smith, Nolan Henderson, none of those guys are really exciting me. I don't think any of those guys are going to be able to take a team that wide receivers are good. Their wide receivers are good, but tight ends, running back, offensive line, I do have questions there. So it's going to take someone to really step up to get this team over the hump. Again, they were 5-5 last year. That was their best season. They have not had a winning season in this kind of new rebirth of spring football. So who's going to be the guy to step up for the QB1? So my overall outlook for the 2026 Houston Gamblers, what I think they're going to look like. Unfortunately for Houston fans, I do think they're going to be a middle-of-the-pack team. I really, really like their wide receiver room and linebacker room. They might be the best wide receiver and linebacker rooms. We didn't even talk about guys like Lawrence Keys and Kyle Loxley. They've got guys all over their wide receiver room, obviously highlighted by Jontre Kirkland and Justin Hall, that are really, really solid players. And then linebackers, with Hines and Moody, production-wise, these guys are tackling machines. You can probably add an Eli Walker there as he plays down in the box a lot. But I've got major questions at both quarterback, running back. I really like Kirk Merritt. I want him to be healthy, but the best predictor of an injury is previous injury. I understand the whole injury prone, and especially in contact sports, some things are just fluke things, but the dude is just not shown to be healthy. And that's when he wasn't even an RB1 role. He was kind of more that scat back. So maybe that's how he'll be played. But right now, there's not a lot of depth in the running back room. And he's definitely the most, productive guy that we know of out there. So I've got questions on the running back room. O-line, they struggled with tackles. They brought back a decent amount of their O-line from last year, which is perplexing to me because their O-line has not been great over the past couple of seasons. And then their defensive end position, as far as how can they generate pressure, losing their top 2 pass rush guys from last season. So I have a lack in trust in head coach Kevin Sumlin and that quarterback room to believe they're really contenders. Sumlin, he was the GM and head coach in Houston, 3-7 last year. They were bottom of the league. He did some great things in college, but how much coaching does Johnny Manziel need? I'm sure we've all kind of seen the stories and stuff. Like Johnny Manziel just did what Johnny Manziel did. He was an incredible player, but I don't think a lot of that was coaching. Now his success at Houston, was very impressive, and he did have 6 winning seasons at Texas A&M. Never really kind of reached that pinnacle with the talent I thought they had with guys like Mike Evans and Johnny Manziel. But especially recently. That last stint, maybe it's the last stint in Houston, but it kind of left a sour taste in my mouth on Sumlin. Now, there is enough talent on the roster, and you do have a very solid defensive coordinator that I think they are going to win some games. I don't think they're going to be a bottom feeder like they have been in some years, but I do project them. Obviously, hey, middle of the pack. I think they're going to be somewhere that fifth, sixth, seventh team. I don't think they're going to sneak into the playoffs. There's always, a chance, obviously, right? This is all projections and things like that. But this is not a team that really excites me or think that they're going to be a contender this year. So I've got them as the middle of the pack team. Wide receiver, linebacker room, defensive coordinator. I think they hit those out of the park. But quarterback, running back, head coach, O-line, defensive end, a lot of question marks on the board. So more question marks than I think they drilled it. So that is why I am going with middle of the pack for these Houston Gamblers. All right, folks, that is our team preview for these Houston Gamblers. Like I mentioned, just 18 days away from the kickoff of the UFL season there on Friday, March 27th. What is next? Well, we've now done the DC Defenders. We've now done the Dallas Renegades, the St. Louis Battlehawks, and the Houston Gamblers. So 4 more teams left to go there. If you haven't already, check out the Everything You Need to Know About the UFL episode, the 2026 rules episode, because that's very important to how this is all going to shake out. We're going to do the 14 previews. I'm going to do one season preview episode, kind of encompasses quick takes on all the teams, and then more talks about, hey, which teams do I think you should play some futures on, which teams have some value, and then what this show is going to be throughout the season. It's going to be a weekly, show where I break down each game, talk about all 4 of the matchups, and then give out my best bets as far as, hey, what am I betting on as far as spreads, money line, over, under, things like that. If they have player props available early enough in the week, I will absolutely add that. I'll be playing the player props. Every year of the UFL, we've kind of got more and more. It used to be more of those prediction markets where it was underdog and prize picks. We had to do with that. We couldn't really bet props on the books. Last year, they just started that with the ESPN Bet and their partnership. What's that going to look like this season? Hopefully, they open up the markets early enough, like college and NFL, that we can bet them early. Usually like to do the show on the Wednesdays, may push it to Thursdays if they're consistently putting out props. But if anything, I will put them out over on X. So just another reason to go ahead and follow me over on X at the DGen Doc. All right, folks, you know what they say. A lock a day keeps the bookie away. And here at the DGen Docs, we've got your prescription. From Doc here on DFSG Plus, I'm out of here.